have a very great second speaker too. Jeremy, that tonight is with us right now, is the data editor with BuzzFeed, but he gained reputation before with working with Wall Street Journal.
This is a demonstration of
I don't know if
Wirecast.
you know, like the famous Pulitzer Prize has a version that is Pulitzer for journalism, and he was the finalist for that was 2 years ago, right?
2 years ago for National Report.
Yeah, as the national reporter. And he's also a big contributor to Project Jupiter. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I wish I could actually contribute back to Jupyter, but I just use it a lot. And I'm not #1 at anything, but I enjoyed that. That was really interesting. I'm at least number 200 in any single thing I do. But what I do is combine data analysis and journalism at BuzzFeed. I'm the data editor there. We have a small team of 3 people who apply data analysis to stories, basically. Our focus is on investigative stories, but we do non-investigative features or even silly things. And one thing
Of Wirecast.
I did something on trying to figure out using simulations to figure out how long my home team, the Golden State Warriors, how long their streak would last. So it's a mix. We're part of a big newsroom that covers all sorts of stuff. We're based on the investigations team, so we have a bit of a focus. As Mehmet said, I came from the Wall Street Journal, where I was doing something pretty similar. I was doing a little bit more, at times, interactive graphics, and before that, I was working at Slate magazine, where I was really more of a reporter that was using programming to improve my work. Over time, I've been doing more programming and less journalism. So that's kind of my background. I've been at BuzzFeed for almost 2 years now. I was at the Wall Street Journal for about 2.5 years. I also, as a side project, have a newsletter that every Wednesday morning sends 5 interesting data sets that you can kind of play around with and have fun with. But mostly, I'm going to talk about what I do at BuzzFeed, and then talk about something that interests me as a journalist, but is not an official BuzzFeed project. At BuzzFeed, we aim to open source as much of our analysis as we can, given all sorts of constraints there may be. For almost every big project we do, there is a corresponding
This is a demonstration of
repository
Wirecast.
that we publish. You can find them all at our kind of central repository, BuzzFeed News / everything on GitHub. And I'll walk you through what one of those looks like. To give a little context, there are a few reasons why we open source. It's not really because it's cool and the hip new thing, although that helps. The main reasons are to be transparent. At BuzzFeed and at a lot of other places, we're not the only ones doing this. Transparency in our reporting is important. We do it not just with code, but we do it with links to documents if we're depending on documents for a story. We try to explain as much about how we reached the story we're telling, how we came to the facts that we're relaying as we can. And so data is part of a bigger push for transparency. It's also, I think, especially important with data, beyond general transparency concerns, that it is reproducible, right? Data analysis is a tricky thing. We want to give our readers as much confidence as possible that we did it, if not the right way, a right way. You know, that what we did is consistent and correct, even if maybe you would do it a slightly different way. So this is one example of a repository we published. It's the repository behind this kind of investigative profile we published at the end of the year, part of a series that looked at the H-2 immigration program. This was a profile of a guy in North Carolina named Yuri. I encourage you to read more, but the synopsis is he figured out a corner of America's very complicated immigration law that let him make a ton of money bringing people in for temporary unskilled work. So unlike, say, H-1B, where you're working as skilled workers, and unlike long-term unskilled visas, these are people who come in for usually less than a year to farm or work in a factory, stuff like that. The reporters I worked with on this story are fantastic and did a ton of document-based, court-based, interview-based research and reporting. But we also wanted to use data, mostly from the Department of Labor, to kind of zoom out a little bit and give some context about how much business this guy was doing, how many visas he had obtained, how his trajectory had gone over the years, and as well as using it somewhat in an investigative way to see what companies linked to him were now doing business now that he's actually in jail, and pled guilty to conspiracy to defraud the government. So with every new project we do, we refine how we present our open source version. We hope it's getting better. We've kind of started to converge in a way on a presentation that's both understandable to lay readers. You shouldn't have to have a PhD. I don't have a PhD. You shouldn't even necessarily have to know how to program to understand what we did. At the same time, we want to provide enough depth so that if you do know how to program and you do want to inspect and really get a sense of what we did and whether you think it's done correctly, you can examine that. So this repository has three main sections. One is a kind of an overview. Here's the data we used. Here's how we got it. Here's how we processed it. The next section is a kind of another sort of overview. Here are all the specific sentences from the story that our analyses support. And here's how, briefly speaking, if we can summarize it easily, we calculated, we came to that finding. In cases where, in almost all these cases, there's a longer explanation available in, the Jupyter notebook that we publish. And this really goes through step by step. Here we load the data. Here's how we isolate this agent's visas from other people who are obtaining visas. Here's how we calculate how many visas this person and his network have obtained over the years, and so on. And it goes through basically every calculation we made is in this notebook. And we try to make it something that's understandable to most people, but this is kind of intended more for the technical reader, and the README on the GitHub page is intended for a more general view. So the next thing I want to talk about is, and I'm happy to take questions about BuzzFeed stuff at the end too, something that I'm interested in as someone who does this kind of work, but I'm not really speaking as someone who works for BuzzFeed. This idea is not like an official idea we're actively working on, but something I want to explore with groups like this. And the idea is, what would data journalism look like if it operated more like science, or at least good science? And what would data journalism look like if it operated more like the open source community? I think people who work with data in journalism today have embraced the idea of transparency in publishing code on GitHub or wherever, Bitbucket, doesn't really matter. That hurdle has kind of been cleared. I don't think it takes much convincing to tell someone convince someone why you would want to do this in a newsroom. What we really haven't done, though, at least to my knowledge, is embrace kind of the other half of open source, which is collaboration, especially decentralized collaboration.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
We think we're doing things correctly, and I think a lot of the time we are, but maybe we're not doing it optimally. Maybe we're taking a direction that is could be complemented by another line of analysis. And And to the extent we do, we try to come up with these alternative theories, but I think a lot of both learnings from the open source code community, but also from science and scientific method,
demonstration of Wirecast.
has shown that more minds can converge on a better solution. One example of this is from last year. Nature asked 29 different teams of researchers to answer the same question, same research question. This was whether I think referees in soccer are more likely to give red cards to darker skinned players. Lower
This
down,
is a demonstration
here,
of
I don't know if you guys
Wirecast.
can see that. These are all the conclusions that each of the teams came to. And in some ways, they're pretty consistent, right? There's this kind of strong center. But you do get people who either have concluded that the difference is insignificant or maybe even tending toward the opposite conclusion of everyone else. You also get people who think it's much, much stronger. I doubt that
This is a
with
demonstration
a lot
of
of projects you're going to
Wirecast.
find widely divergent results. But you want to kind of know, and there's almost no way to know if you're just working on your own, what other results people might come to. So maybe if data journalism looked more like the open source community or science, we would see something like this, or maybe we'd see something totally different. I think the idea, at least as I've been kind of juggling with
This
it,
is a demonstration of
is,
Wirecast.
to take an approach that in the open states hypotheses, states and in a way registers like we have with medical trials, the methodologies and the endpoints we're testing, then actually tests it, reports back what you found, synthesizes, and keeps on going. And the idea is that anyone could register a hypothesis and a methodology. I don't know if people would, but that would be the idea. I think there are a few reasons, though, why
This is
nobody's
a
really done this,
demonstration
as
of
far as I can
Wirecast.
tell in journalism. I think the simplest reason is just inertia. It's just a new thing. I think another reason is a fear of being scooped, right? There's this sense in journalism that if you have something really good, you want to keep it to yourself until you're ready to publish, and you don't want any other outlet knowing about it ahead of time. I think another concern is that,
This is a
especially with
demonstration
data
of
journalism, what we
Wirecast.
do is supposed to work kind of in sync and lockstep with the rest of the reporting. Very rarely is a data journalism project just data alone. Usually it's in tandem with some other forms of reporting. And to have only one chunk of that public and one chunk of that evolving on its own trajectory could be difficult to work with in the newsroom. And then I think the final reason, and
This is a
one of the reasons
demonstration
I want
of
to bring this up
Wirecast.
with groups like this is I think there's a fear that it's a whole lot of work for very little return, right? That we fancy these questions and topics to be much more interesting maybe than other people do. So I'm kind of curious if we can just, I'm just going to ask people whether, we'll actually go instead, I hate this, but we'll do a hand raising thing. How many of you consider yourselves to ever have done any form of journalism?
This is a
right? Not necessarily
demonstration of
for
Wirecast.
a mainstream publication, but you published something that tried to say something about the world to a general audience. Okay, like half, great. And how many have done that in like an official capacity? Okay, great. And then of the people, whether you said yes or no to those, how many of you would be interested in trying to answer journalistic type questions, right? This is not
a demonstration of Wirecast.
data science, for example. We're not doing predictive modeling, but say, what is the best way to estimate the amount of pollution that a factory puts out based on public data sources, right? You have various readings from the EPA, you have self-reports, that kind of thing. Is that something, and I'm not going to hold you guys to this, but that if
this is a demonstration
someone
of
who
Wirecast
works for a news organization and thought that it might be eventually worth publishing, if someone said, I'm going to work in the open with this, do you want to collaborate? You'd be acknowledged maybe in the story as having helped, but there would be no monetary incentive. That's not something usually we can do. Is that something you think you would even consider doing? Yeah? Okay. Maybe we can go around and just ask what
This
sort
is
of
a
stories or
demonstration of
projects
Wirecast.
or topics are the kinds that you would be interested in contributing to? I don't know if anyone wants to shout it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the maps that the Cardo folks showed at the very beginning, anything regarding public transportation and things like that.
Right, so if the question was, we really want to, forget the Cardo DB already did, we really want to tackle the question of how will the,
impacted by
right, exactly, how will the L train
like
closure,
that, yeah.
right. Yeah, okay, great, and that sounds like the kind of thing that a news organization would definitely be
This
interested,
is a
not only
demonstration of
in eventually
Wirecast.
publishing, but in getting like a very wide set of eyes on, right? Because it combines, hey, things that we're not super familiar with. We don't deal with transportation data all the time, but also, maybe urban planners have ideas, maybe building inspectors have ideas, or transportation experts. Yeah. Any others? Yeah.
So I have more of a comment.
Sure,
I
yeah.
see what you're trying to do. I think it's really cool, and I would give you like maybe two possible avenues.
This is a
that I would think
demonstration
could
of
be,
Wirecast.
Great. Yeah.
potentially valuable. One would be to like target like individuals who are interested in helping, which is kind of what you're doing now.
Right.
And a good organization for that would be something like Data Time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet they would love to work with you. And then the other one, which seems also like a potentially very interesting, almost more Kaggle-like approach, would be to figure out how to gamify. Right,
That's
the
interesting.
reporting
Yeah.
process.
So the hard.
This is
I
a
like that idea.
demonstration
And
of
I've thought about it in a way
Wirecast.
because how is this really all that different from Kaggle in a way? And I think the way it's different is that there are rarely obviously correct answers in a scoreable way. I think you could say there are correct approaches, right? For example, taking the visa stuff. There is a way to correctly count how many visas someone got based on different flags in the forms.
This is a
And there
demonstration
are
of
ways that are wrong.
Wirecast.
And it would definitely be helpful if there was someone like an immigration expert who would comb over the code, for example, and see if we were making any poor assumptions. But it'd be hard to say that, it'd be hard to score something like that, right? How do you know that we got the number correct if there's nothing to compare it against? But I like that idea. Maybe there are other ways of gamifying.
One
Yeah.
potentially.
This
potentially
is a
useless way
demonstration
to
of
gamify
Wirecast.
To, if you have one of these data sets, you would say, hey, everybody see who makes a visualization, and then whoever makes the best one will be the feature.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, where it's more about judging rather than scoring. Yeah, I like that. Do you have a question about it? Yeah.
I like the idea as a whole. I think asking people outside of the journalist realm to come in and weigh in. I think also along the
This
idea
is a
that
demonstration of
sometimes
Wirecast.
there may be a right answer. There may also not be a right answer.
Right.
If there's different data sets and being able to have public discourse about that could be very interesting. And I think another benefit of kind of having that out there is that people come in from different viewpoints and say, hey, this data set from the EPA versus, this other register that's, talking pollution here and there. They show different things for different reasons, and being able to kind of go through that data set would be very helpful, and I think helpful in the public discourse too.
I think definitely. I mean, that is something
demonstration of Wirecast.
an issue we run into all the time, which is sometimes where there's obviously no one single correct answer because, right, you're working with two data sets. Internally they use different ways of measuring the same outcome. So, I mean, pollution's another great example. you can measure pollution one way, you can measure it another way. There's no true answer. I think a lot of the time the way we approach it is either talking to an expert and having them give their opinion about which one we should use, or giving a range, right? It's somewhere between 25 parts per million and 50 parts per million. But I think that's exactly the kind of case where the more eyeballs, the better those estimates become, or at least the more complete they become. Yeah, sure.
So you've almost got a version of this set up already, right? You've got GitHub repos where you've got your analysis and you've got your solution, you've got your code, and anybody could come along presumably and open an issue there, or like send a pull request. Do you see people doing that? Is there
not all that much? And I think part of the reason is we do it at the end.
Yeah.
Right. That we don't leave much room, and we present. I think one is that we don't leave much room for that discussion, but also we present the way we present those repositories is as a complete thing. And I wonder, and I haven't quite thought this through all the way, but how do you present something similar to data analysis as incomplete and available for improvement? And maybe it's as simple as just a big banner at the top that says, hey, we're in the middle of this, is a work in progress. If you have improvements, let us know, or something like that. Go there and there.
How often do different newspapers or different journalists study the same problem and come to different conclusions like this?
It's a good question. I think the overall answer is rarely, because newsrooms are resource constrained and they want to be doing new things. And there's very little glory, to put it bluntly, in, just as there is in science, in replicating someone else's approach or testing someone else's approach. I think there have been a few examples where this happens naturally. It's not so much data analysis as, and this is more like a data methodology. Last year, both the Washington Post and the Guardian,
This is a
at almost
demonstration
exactly the
of
same time,
Wirecast.
started publishing a count of how many people had been killed by police in the U.S. They took different approaches. They're generally directionally in agreement, but the Guardian, for example, counted all deaths, not just deaths by gun. The Washington Post focused on police shootings. One methodology counted off-duty officers, the other methodology didn't. So there definitely are
This is a
cases where
demonstration
that
of
happens. It's not very
Wirecast.
common. And I think, at least for the police shootings, it has been a good thing. It's added some nuance and the idea that there's, depending on how you count it, a range of estimates. Okay. You had a question?
I had more of a comment.
Yeah, please.
I think it's much more, collaborating on, say, journalism is a lot easier than collaborating on, say, research methodology.
Yeah.
Like, I wrote for my college and high school newspaper, and it's easy to, for an
This
editor,
is a
scan an article and
demonstration
just get
of
an idea
Wirecast.
of how good the writing is.
Yeah.
It's like actually editing it is really difficult. You have to catch every single error, everything goes on fire. But actually getting an impression of whether an article is good, that's relatively easy to do. Getting an idea of whether a methodology is sound, you have to have a pure understanding of 100 different methods, and like there's 20 different studies over there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not all of those methodologies are sound, but I don't know that personally, but the person who wrote me the article had to confirm
This
that
is
with
a
every
demonstration
single
of
article. And that's
Wirecast.
very difficult to do.
I think it is difficult. I also think the difficulty is what makes it so ripe for collaboration in a way, that it's very hard for me to evaluate your methodology for something, for example, but I would bet that there's someone, say, in this room or someone on the internet who's actually very well equipped to answer that question, to evaluate it. I think by opening up those
This is a
methodologies,
demonstration of Wirecast.
we're more likely to find, be able to poke holes in each methodology, but also be able to find people who possess the skills and the kind of domain knowledge to evaluate them most rigorously. I don't know if that's in practice true, but that's at least my theory. Yeah.
So I think the premise is super, super interesting. What I'd love to hear your comment on, like, what are the implications and repercussions of making this
This
new
is a
mechanism
demonstration
fail?
of
So does this
Wirecast.
mean that comments just now go on forever? Is there a rebuttal article? Does the article itself become perpetually edited?
Right.
Does it become a wiki?
That's
How
a
does
great
that
question.
feedback loop take root and become meaningful?
I think so. From my experience working in newsrooms where you have, let's say, an average article that, you know, is a big one, like it's an investigation you're publishing, maybe there are 3 editors, maybe there are 3 editors and 2 reporters, something like
This
that.
is a demonstration
Even
of
with that small
Wirecast.
amount of people, editing is a total, it's crazy. You know, it's back and forth, and you're tweaking one word. I think adding more people to that process would make it even crazier. So I don't think I actually propose, or I don't think it's maybe the most beneficial to do this for the full article, for the text, right? But instead for the core methodology and the core analyses, the backbone of the story.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
And then I think that the writing has to be delegated to a smaller group of people who can communicate more in sync, who know each other professionally. I think there's room, certainly, like, this is purely hypothetical. Let's say we do this for a project, the methodology, we offered an initial methodology, someone came back with a substantially revised one that we agreed was better.
This is a demonstration
They would probably
of
want input on the
Wirecast.
final article, and maybe that makes sense, but I don't think we'd want input in real time from the whole community on the article as it progressed. But to kind of answer your question a little more, I think that's only part of what you were asking. How does, even if you're not putting the whole article through a versioning, distributed, open source system, how does the evolution of the methodology, what if people have more to contribute after we publish the
This
article?
is a demonstration of
I mean,
Wirecast.
on principle, I gotta say that's great, right? You always want more and more accurate information, but it does pose a big question: when is the article complete? And maybe there has to be some deadline, right? Maybe it's, you know, this methodology is open for review for the next 6 months, at which point we're gonna go with the best one we have and just say, we can't do this indefinitely forever. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how these
This is a demonstration
data,
of Wirecast.
reports get used by people?
Yeah, so
Developers?
the most common thing I've heard, I think there are people who, most of the main use is just to inform themselves. There are people who read an article and they want to know more, and this is one way for them to know more, and it kind of satisfies that curiosity. I have heard anecdotally of these also being used in classes, right? Here's an example for
This
how you
is
can
a
approach
demonstration
this
of
particular question.
Wirecast.
But they are kind of by nature pretty narrow. What we've published, some of the things we publish probably have more general applications, but a lot of what we publish is really just trying to answer the main question. We've kind of covered it in the article. I mean, this is another reason why I think people don't really do many pull requests or kind of add to these repositories afterwards, is they're framed very narrowly.
This is a
For
demonstration
better or
of
worse, I think it's
Wirecast.
a good thing for us that we do frame it narrowly. Otherwise, I don't think we could maintain simultaneously 40 repositories with everyone giving feedback on them when our main mission is to find the facts for particular stories. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with the reporters?
Sure.
And what that dialogue and partnership looks like?
Yeah.
Who starts
This
questions?
is a demonstration of
Absolutely.
You talk about
Wirecast.
parallel track, but again, what does that mean?
Yeah, I've been lucky pretty much everywhere I've worked to have colleagues who totally got it, right? That people who maybe they're almost never programmers themselves, but who understand the complications and nuances of data, and have a pretty creative sense of how it can be used. So a lot of the times, it really is a very active dialogue, but they always start somewhere.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
And I never know exactly how to break down how to describe the breakdown, but I would say, very generally speaking, about half the projects we work on start with data as the impetus, where we get a new big data set, maybe through a Freedom of Information Act request, or we found it online that we think nobody's really explored in depth it, or we have a new approach to it. And either we carry that through to the end, or pretty often we say, okay, let's say this data is about,
of
we'll
Wirecast.
keep on going with pollution. This is a pollution data set. I know a little bit about pollution, but we have a science reporter who knows a lot. And we will reach out to them, and we'll usually collaborate that way. About the other half of the time, it goes in the other direction, which is a reporter has a great idea for a story, and they have a hunch that there's data out there, or they know there's data out there, and they want to be able to analyze, and they don't have the skills themselves. In that case, they'll kind of pull us in.
This is a
Both
demonstration of
situations,
Wirecast.
it's usually kind of, it's a back and forth of hypothesis, test, hypothesis, test. I would like to say that I come up with all the great ideas for how to approach the data sets, but especially like the visas project, those reporters knew so much about the visa system and what might be going right, what might be going wrong, that they probably came up with, half or 2/3 of what we'd be looking at, and I was just the code monkey making sure it worked right.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Anything else? Great. Thank you guys. This is really helpful for you guys.
Thank you very much again. And thank you all guys for being here. Our next meetup is happening, Anna, when is it happening?
February 9th.
So it's February 9th, it's in downtown Manhattan, so no L train problems.
This is a demonstration of
And it's
Wirecast.
in a WeWork office in Fulton Station. Just take 2, 3, 4, 5, all of them to Fulton Station. Looking forward to seeing you there. And I wanted to say that.
You don't know what it is?
They just tell me 2 hours before that, Mama, we are hosting it. We are publishing that just before we finish. Also, if you can, whatever news you would like, just check odsc.com and register for our newsletter. It's kind of cool. And we don't spam you with bullshit and stuff. It's a useful
Demonstration
stuff.
of Wirecast.
I was just going to add to that, thank you for coming down. If you guys ever need a space to do anything again, let us know. We're happy to host here and do things. Also, if you'd like a very swanky, lovely CartoDB t-shirt, feel free to grab one at the back. We've got a whole bunch to give away. So,